Hello and welcome back to the Got a Case of Wanderlust podcast. I'm your host Lydia, and today we are back with the continuing series of modern day colonialism within travel. So this is part of a series that I'm doing based off an article that I've written on my blog, which I will link in the show notes, and we're continuing with part 2 of the series. Today we're going to be diving into, first and foremost, the bucket list mentality. And this is kind of a term that I kind of coined myself, but hear me out. So the bucket list, it's a beautiful thing. It's, a way to make the most of this one wild and precious life that we have. And I'm a fan of a good bucket list. Trust me, I have multiple. But here's the problem. Too often the point of a bucket list is lost when we become so fixated on the accomplishment of a goal that we forget the importance of the journey it takes to get there. Bear with me. I'm not trying to be all philosophical here. Okay, well, maybe a little because I'm very a philosophy person, but I'm trying to argue that an entire destination is too complex and diverse to be crossed off a list as a been there, done there kind of thing. And I call this the bucket list mentality, when we treat places like goals to check off a list, or as things to be quote-unquote conquered. When we reduce destinations to their names in need of accomplishing, we are essentially saying that because we visited once, there's no need to go again, as we already know what it's like and can tell others that we've been. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not hating on the bucket list, but I'm here to kind of emphasize to treat them not as sports, where the person who's traveled to the most amount of countries is the winner. Countries, cultures, and places around the world are more than just their symbolic title. They are ever-changing and multifaceted. So can we please stop asking if someone has quote-unquote done blank country? We could apply the bucket list mentality to more than just country counting. It also manifests when people travel to a certain site just to extract digital content from it. In other words, doing it for the gram. How often have you visited a particular attraction just to snap a photo of it then leave? Probably all of us. I know I have. Not only do we limit our real-life experiences to the aesthetics of a social media post, but we perpetuate over-tourism when we visit places that are already frequently visited by other tourists. Now, this is just one example, but I'm going to bring in Santorini here. So Santorini's iconic whitewashed houses overlooking the Mediterranean Sea are probably like the top, travel shot online. One of them, at least, inspiring millions of tourists annually to visit the Greek island for their own photos. Over-tourism to the island has created a host of problems, from gentrification, which I covered in the last episode, to cultural loss. Even though Greece has over 227 inhabitable islands, most of the tourists' attention is on Instagram famous Santorini. The problems of over-tourism could be significantly reduced if tourism were spread out over the many islands of Greece, but because of the attention garnered from social media, tourists continue to travel to Santorini, trying to recreate a photo that's already been posted before. So how to not treat destinations like the colonizers of the past? Stop objectifying them for our own self-pleasure and treat them with the dignity that they deserve. Now we're going to move into power dynamics. So this is another big category that is definitely still related to the previous points, but more specifically, let's talk about unequal power dynamics. What is it? So an unequal power dynamic / relationship occurs when one individual or group has greater power to influence another, whether that's socially, politically, or financially, or all three. In terms of travel, an unequal power dynamic can look like a tourist from a global north country visiting a global south country. Now I'm using these terms instead of developing versus developed nation or country because I feel like these are starting to become a bit outdated as, what constitutes a developed versus developing country. Global North versus Global South is more factual rather than hypothetical or like opinionated. You could read more about it if you want the differentiation about why we're using global north and global south over developing versus developed. There's no perfect terms, but as of now, this is the closest I think we've come to not speaking in problematic, potentially offensive terms. Anyway, if you are a citizen from the global north, you inherently have a greater power because of privileges such as financial abundance, because global north countries generally have higher salaries and stronger currencies, allowing greater spending power than global south countries. You also have passport strength, because global north passports are genuinely stronger than global south passports because they allow visa-free access to more countries, not to mention less hassle through immigration or customs. So what else do you have? You have legal protection because global north countries generally grant more legal rights to protect their citizens when abroad than global south citizens, which often translates into the destination country where the tourist gets better treatment than the actual local people from local enforcement officers. Why is this important to know? Because whether you're conscious of it or not, it directly impacts your travel experiences. By becoming aware of your privileges, you will hopefully increase your sensitivity to your impact on local communities and navigate interactions respectfully. But what happens if tourists aren't aware of the privileges afforded to them by unequal power dynamics? It could be seemingly innocent, but can translate to larger, more severe problems, and here are some examples of how these unrealized power dynamics can manifest in neocolonialist ways. We're going to begin with voluntourism. And I started off with this quote in my article by a person named Mitchell Baker, who is the chairwoman of Mozilla Foundation. And this is just something I found on the internet. But she said that the people who are most affected by decisions should be the ones making them. So what is voluntourism? Voluntourism is when volunteers, typically from more affluent Western countries, go abroad to volunteer, quotes, in quotes, in less affluent countries. This type of traveling can be problematic in several ways. And I'll go into this, but I know what you may be thinking. Volunteering? How is that a bad thing? It's like everything I do now is like bad and politicized. Like, hear me out. Just because your intentions are good doesn't mean that the outcome will always be inherently good as well. You could have good intentions and still create harm. So let's get into the problems with voluntourism. Firstly, volunteers are often sent without proper training and therefore don't actually provide value to communities. This is voluntourism at its best harmful way, I guess. And many voluntourism organizations only offer programs which last around 1 to 2 weeks at the minimum, which is, hardly enough time to make a lasting impact. So again, this is unhelpful and at worst harmful, especially if the projects involve children. Children need stability. If every couple of weeks there's a new English teacher in their school, how might that impact the children's ability to learn and build stable, healthy relationships? Secondly, the project you're working on may be taking jobs away from local people. Oftentimes, volunteers are sent into these communities where the jobs are actually able to be done by local people, but because these organizations from abroad are making money sending these volunteers to these communities, these people are actually left with less opportunity than before. Thirdly, the money that voluntourism organizations receive may not be appropriately allocated to the target community. So oftentimes, I'm not saying every time, you have to do your research, obviously, but some organizations unfortunately don't use the money that they're getting to fund the mission that they claim that they're serving, but rather goes to the organization's needs or the employee's needs, which is important up to an extent, but if the organization is really intent on helping the community, then their funds will be going to that community and not, staying in their organization, which unfortunately many organizations are guilty of not actually helping. And lastly, the target community is often not actively involved in the process, or most problematically, not even asking for foreign assistance in the first place. So all of these points elucidate the glaring effects of the savior complex. So this is when an individual or group feels the need to quote unquote save or help another without their request. This is one of the best examples of neocolonialism, when an individual or group feels superior over another and imposes themselves onto another non-consensually, disempowering the helped. Is there a way to volunteer abroad and not contribute to neocolonialism? Yes, of course, it's possible. And the surest way to do so ethically is to ensure that your volunteer work is actively sought by the community and allows their direct involvement and not disempowering them further. So some questions to ask if you are interested or thinking about doing a voluntourism sort of project is to ask yourself and to research, is the work I'm doing something the community themselves have expressed the need or desire by foreign individuals? Is the work guided and led by people from the community? How much of my money is actually going to the local community? Can the work I'm doing be done by anyone else in the community? And if so, perhaps I'm taking away a job opportunity from a local. Will I have the training or skills necessary to truly be of service? Does the experience involve children? And if so, is the project long enough to actually create a lasting positive impact on their lives? And lastly, will I be living like the locals in the community? Or most of the locals. We'll get into living like a local later. Or will I be sheltered in a Western style arrangement? Because come on, I could kind of see there's like something wrong with the picture. If you're staying in like an air conditioned, queen size mattress, down the block, and the rest of the people in the community are living in non-air conditioned, less developed houses, like there's something wrong with that picture. See, these are all questions to ask yourself to see if your project is actually good intentioned and making sure that the mission is being carried out effectively. So yeah, hopefully these questions help spark some reflection if you are a traveler interested in doing these type of things, and also going back to the bucket list mentality, just really being honest with yourself to see if your behavior is being more extractive on the local community and causing potentially more harm than good. Again, you could find these questions on my blog. I'll link it again in the show notes. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being here for this discussion. I really think it's important as travelers to always be educating yourselves and asking yourselves difficult questions, especially when our impact extends outside of ourselves in the places that we're visiting. So, until the next episode, bye!